If you're sending out demos or uploading your music to SoundCloud or directly to Spotify, your tracks should have the appropriate loudness. But with these different loudness targets and different info floating around out there, things can get a bit confusing. So let's take a look at what's most important to figure out how loud your tracks are supposed to be. By now you've probably heard that Spotify has a loudness target of -14 LUFS. But you've probably also heard people say stuff like this.
You've probably been told that you need to deliver masters at -14 LUFS. However, all major record labels and independent artists always ask me to master it to -8 LUFS.
So kind of confusing, right? Should you aim for -14 or for -8? I would say let's just check out some house tracks and see how loud they are. And we're going to be using Voxengo span to get some RMS values, and Youlean loudness meter 2 to get some LUFS values. Both of these tools can be used for free. But let's jump into this track right here. So if we let this run for a bit, you see, okay, we have an RMS value of -10 and LUFS more or less -9, -8.8. All right, let's check out another one. Kind of hit refresh and reset. Okay, this one seems to be slightly louder, like -8.5 LUFS, and then we have 9.0 in RMS. Let's do another one. Reset. Okay, this one's quieter, -10.3 LUFS, -11.2. Okay, so just like that, there is a variety of loudnesses present here. We can get louder even. Let's say we have listened to this track by DJ Stu. Because of copyrights, I have to filter this out a bit, but we're going to listen to the low end, but see the real values over here in the meter. So play that. Gonna refresh. Okay. This bad boy is pretty loud. -8 in RMS. Before we had between like -10 and -12, and LUFS we have -6.7. So this is already quite a bit louder. If we now go a lot more commercial, also I'm going to play this filtered, we're just listening to the low end, but get the full values over here, tracked by Fletcher. And yeah, let's check that out. Okay, this one is pretty loud. So RMS -7 and LUFS -5.6. These tracks which I bought off Bandcamp, some of them were also very quiet. So if I play this one, for example, and turn the filter back off, it's a track I actually like. Nice, deep and moody. And it's pretty quiet. It's like -11.7 LUFS. And then the same in RMS, 11.6. So I guess by now it's become pretty clear that not all of these tracks are either playing at -14 LUFS or exactly at -8. We've seen a pretty big variety ranging from commercial stuff at -6 LUFS down to like undergroundy stuff, which I have from Bandcamp, where it was more like playing at -12, which seems to be a bit quiet maybe. None of them were playing exactly at -14. And you can kind of forget about this whole Spotify gain compensation thing, especially if you're making dance music. Dance music is supposed to be loud. Even if Spotify is turning you down a bit, you're going to compare more or less well to other tracks at -14 LUFS. And secondly, you can just turn off that feature. I think I even had it turned off by default. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if it's turned on in your case or if you turn it off, if it's turned on by default or not. I find that kind of interesting, but it's really something that you shouldn't worry about that much. What you should worry about is how loud your specific tracks should be depending on the scenario. And I would say, let's take a quick step back and kind of understand how loudness is measured and kind of the psychoacoustics behind it, so we can get a better understanding, and then also kind of bring it into the context where you deliver your music, where your music is played, and how that impacts the loudness that you might want to go for. So really quick, for RMS, I kind of like to use an analogy of a container, like a shipping container. It has like its fixed dimensions. You can stuff some things in there. And the ceiling of this container is very clear in digital audio. That's 0. So that's the 0 you have right here. So in mastering for loudness, a finished track should get as close to 0 as possible, just like you would want to fill up your container as high as possible, right? But then depending on what you stuff in there, how much energy is present, how full the container is, you will get higher loudness values. So in a way, RMS stands for root mean squared, which is just the way it calculates this average. You have to square things up because amplitudes can be positive and negative. If you just bring them together, it's kind of tough to form a number for loudness. So you're squaring everything to remove the negative values and then bring it together to get a loudness representation of a specific part of a track. So you're kind of putting a container around a part of a track and then saying, okay, how much amplitude is going on in here? And then this container is kind of moving along the track. Some values come in, some values go out to measure how much loudness is present at a certain time of the track. And that's kind of cool and a useful number to kind of compare. But in a way, it's not just important how much stuff that is inside your container. It's also important how heavy this stuff is. And that's kind of what LUFS is trying to take into account, because different frequencies are perceived louder than others by our ears. And there's quite a bunch of science behind that, which we can take a quick look at. Usually you will find this graph if you look into loudness counters and psychoacoustics about loudness. And this curve is called the Fletcher Munson curve. These were two guys who were kind of the first ones, I guess, to experiment what frequencies are perceived how loud. And what they found, this yellow curve, is that our ears are pretty sensitive at like 6,000 hertz, because that's where the important things, the dangerous things are happening. So that's kind of evolutionary. If you go much higher, we're getting less sensitive to certain frequencies. So if they're playing at the same level, they will seem quieter. Up to 20K, we don't hear anything anymore. So that's the limit of hearing that we have. Then once you move down to the bass, the same thing happens. The lower we go in frequency, the less loud it will actually seem. And this has been updated with like equal loudness contours. Kind of the work that they did was kind of finessed a bit. But I think there's a cool experiment to just check this out real quick to really notice how different frequencies seem to have a different loudness, even if they're playing at the same level, and how that's taking into account in LUFS. So sorry for these sine waves, but we're going to start with the sine wave at 50 hertz. Bring up the level. So we have a sine wave playing at this level, 50 hertz. See down here in the graph. We don't hear much. I can hear it some on my headphones, but this one is pretty low. So some speakers might not even be able to play it. If we double this frequency, okay, we're at 98. Things get a lot more audible, and we see the LUFS value rise. Let's bring it up even more. More. So we're going higher in frequency, and the LUFS value is getting higher and higher. So we're going up pretty high in LUFS. I turned down the volume just so the sine wave doesn't sound too annoying, but things would get very loud if we go high in frequency. So yeah, that's kind of what we're taking into account, and that's pretty relevant for various different things. I already mentioned that depending on where you play your music and how it's played, different loudnesses are needed. And we can stick with the container example that depending on what you want to ship and where you want to ship it, you kind of have to, you can just fill up the container in a certain way. Like if you have a bunch of bikes, they're not going to be able to fill up all the space. But if you have like small bags or whatever, they can fill up everything. Let's leave the container example for now and just take a look at some music. So this one was a track which was more like a quiet track. If you make a container around the waveform, you can see, okay, we are reaching to the ceiling but there are spaces in between. So technically we could fill more into the container, but the track sounds fine like this. So this isn't gonna max out our loudness, but this track is composed in a way that it doesn't have to be that loud. So if you have a track like this, which isn't or doesn't have to be that loud, if we check our meters once again, refresh, minus 10 LUFS, minus 11.5 RMS. Those could be pretty good numbers to aim for if you know you have a track that's kind of chill. If you go for a track where there's a bit more action, you have a long kick and a long bass, for example this one here. Okay, minus 8.5, minus 10. I feel minus 10 RMS is kind of a good thing to aim for because you don't have to go too crazy loud. It gets kind of difficult to get much louder if you're kind of starting out. So I'd say minus 10 RMS and minus 9 LUFS are two pretty good, decent, realistic loudness targets that you can aim for nice and bouncy house tracks that like have some space in there, are not completely overloaded. And then depending on if you go a bit more chill and fluffy, you can go below that, or if you fill up your style is filled up more with more bass and longer kick drums, you can aim for higher values. So for example, let's just listen real quick to another sound. I would say it's cool. Track like this. You will see it will usually be running around minus 10 in RMS, minus 9.5 in LUFS is cool. What we also learned is that once you have more stuff coming in, like vocals or synth sounds and melodic elements, you can tell that the LUFS value will actually go up. You see, the LUFS value is going up because our ears are more sensitive to the melodic stuff that's coming in, so things are getting louder, remembering the curve that we looked at. So the more elements that come in this frequency area will have an impact on raising your LUFS levels. And that's why many commercial productions tend to be so loud, because they usually aim to kind of fill up that space so you can hear lots of stuff on small speakers in the car to like bring those frequencies in there. But also if you have like commercial dance productions like by Fletcher, they want to work well on club speakers and they want to come through on small speakers. So that's why you also get kind of a flat frequency balance. You will see the balance is more or less even out. If we go like to default, you can see this is kind of flat. We want to be present everywhere in order to get the low end energy in there, as well as the vocals and the mid-range energy and the lead sounds. We kind of have to squeeze everything a bit together, and things will just get loud if you want to put all of that into your container. If you now compare this to like more undergroundy dance stuff, which is also supposed to bounce on the dance floor. Okay, for this one I can turn off the filter. You will often find that you get somewhat more of a bathtub kind of frequency spectrum, because you have your hi-hats for rhythm and then they focus a lot on the bass that's going in there. And it's not as important to fill up the mid-range that much, because the people just don't care that much about small speakers on your car or listening or sounding well in your car, because the music is not aimed for that scenario. And yeah, so it's kind of a question of style also. So another undergroundy track was this one. And this one, for example, is running at like minus 11.8 and minus 11.7 LUFS. I would say that's definitely too quiet. In this case, it's not that big of a deal because it's a track that was, I guess, re-released from vinyl that's now on Bandcamp, and it's not remastered, so it wasn't intended to bring it up that loud. But I would probably, before playing it, create my own master just so these peaks don't go too crazy into the limiters of the club system. Depending on what you're playing on, sometimes the systems decide, well, if your peaks are too high, the sub is just going to go away completely. I guess if you've played in some small bars and stuff, you maybe had that experience in the past. So you can kind of prevent that by making things a bit louder and modern. So I guess we can throw a limiter on here, and I also added some EQ to kind of avoid this crazy bathtub frequency graph, but it's also okay. Same goes for this one. I also bought it off Bandcamp. I would say it could technically be louder. Because it's running at like minus 13 RMS, minus 13 LUFS. So I would also like limit this one a bit more, but I guess some of these tracks just don't worry too much about it because people would either listen to them at home, switch the record, turn on the volume to the level that's fine, and then in the club you also have controls over your volume and kind of even things out. But in a way, these days, I would say it makes sense to kind of aim for a good loudness target, which, like I said, would be like minus 10 RMS, minus 9 LUFS, and then see if your tracks are louder or quieter. Yeah, that was kind of to kick things off, to get an idea about loudness. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments if anything was unclear. And I'm going to do some mastering videos coming up as well sometime soon, I hope. So I hope to see you around for those. Peace.